Ammaroth is an elder spirit, a being of the ancient world, whose thunderous footsteps have marked the turn of ages. Deathless and eternal, Ammaroth was there at the world's forming and will be there when it ends. Long before any human hands had sullied the earth, in the time of the great elvish empires and their sweeping forests, the army of the Hells came to the world in force. Pouring from rents in the world's fabric, their dark industries poisoned the land and levelled the mountains, fire gnawing through the vast forests like a disease. The sheer agony of it reached even Ammaroth, who had before now known only the whispers of the wind and the dreaming songs of the elves. It responded with the rage of a newborn, lashing out with bones of the earth as its weapons. Its rage, though, is ceaseless, and over the ages it has awoken time and time again, roused by some great defiling of the land or by the steady advance of civilization. Each time Ammaroth thunders down upon the source of its distress, but in Ammaroth's footsteps springs up nature, reclaiming and renewing the devastated earth. But this story starts with Ammaroth arriving. He's been sent to me by Mammoth Factory Games, and they've got a Kickstarter going on, and he's the free STL. There's a link in the description. Please go check out their Kickstarter, it is awesome. And when they said, can you do a diorama for us? I'm like, as long as you don't want me to paint a miniature really well. I'm like, we'll send you one. So all I need to do is turn this picture frame into an Ammaroth diorama. I love using picture frames. They have a neat base, they come with a handy top, just seal it with a bit of Mod Podge and glue. And then it's on to the next layer, which is sculpt to mould. I found black ink wasn't enough to make it go black, and I needed it black because it's an ashy wasteland. So I put in a huge amount of acrylic paint and smoothed it all out into an undulating surface. But Ammaroth is on a base, so I needed to hollow out the middle, and I used Ammaroth to place it, and I put cling film on there so his base wouldn't get mucky. Tidied it all off and left it on the side to dry for the weekend. I bought these really cheap and nasty plastic armatures for trees for a book that I wrote. Quick plug, building realistic model railroad scenery, available at any good hobby shop and Amazon. And these trees will have been victims of forest fires, and there's only the really big branches left. So I spent a lot of time cutting off most of that nasty plastic. Then I used double-sided sticky tape and took them outside and sprayed them matte black. Got to get rid of that plastic shine somehow. Thankfully the sculpt mould was still a little soft when I did this, so I could just push the trees in. But it was clear after I added them, they just weren't enough. And actually when you look at ashy forests after forest fires, which is what this is, there's definitely a lot more stumps and trees and brash that's fallen on the ground as the trees have burnt it off. So I didn't glue Ammaroth in, and I spent a lot of time creating loads and loads of trees from cocktail sticks. Just broke them up, shoved them in, and left them there. But they seemed a bit big. I mean, I know Ammaroth is massive and these are tree trunks. I just had to go raid the garden. It's amazing that no matter how neat and tidy your garden is, there's always little bits of stalks and grasses and stuff like that hanging around in the borders. So I went and picked up loads of them. I also kept a few of the cocktail sticks and bits of grass on one side. Sadly, when I spray painted the bits of grass, most of them flew off, even though they were in a bit of polystyrene. This is just matte black car paint in a spray, nice and easy. I covered the whole diorama in it, obviously leaving Ammaroth inside. No burnt out base would be complete though without my favourite tar grout, this time in blacks and greys. I found the actual grey tar grout was a bit too brown. Actually it wasn't really grey, so I ended up using mostly black and charcoal and a really light dusting of white. When I was happy with the colouring, I've gone darker around the edges and more white towards the middle, and I wanted really desaturated tones on this to emphasise the colour in the nature area. Once all I was happy with and it's all on dry, I sprayed it with isopropyl alcohol and water. This is to help the glue flow. It cuts down surface tension, and with tile grout like this, if it's too thick, it will ball or it will create holes. And when everything's wet, it's time to add the glue. Now I use dilute matte Mod Podge, so it's water with about 1/6 to 1/3 matte Mod Podge. But I can't get too strong a solution through my spray bottle. It's very fine, and I want it fine so it doesn't disturb the tile grout, but it means I've got about 1/6 glue in there. Now, on this, it doesn't matter. Tile grout has cement, so it will actually set itself with just water, but I like the belt and braces of the glue, and I make sure it is running with glue as a result. If you're using a stronger mix and can get it to spray, you may not need to put quite as much on, but you do need to make sure everything is well and truly soaked. But with huge amounts of glue comes puddles, and I just soak those up with some kitchen roll. Works really well and will suck it magically out. Try not to disturb your tile grout though. When it was dry, I glued Ammaroth in place with some white glue. Now up till now, I haven't wanted to soak him with the glues, so he's been kept off the diorama to keep him safe. I glued down the spare twigs and branches across the base and filled the gap around the edge with more black and charcoal tile grout. Now I used a brush to apply a lot of this, tapping it gently to get it in place. And instead of spraying with the isopropyl alcohol and glues, I have the exact same mixes in dropper bottles, which means I don't have to get them on Ammaroth. I mentioned that you might get holes and weird artifacts when you're gluing tile grout because it's quite fine. If you do, now is the time when you're putting extra glue down to fill them in by just tapping some tile grout over the top. I also had some straight lines around the edges of the frame where I hadn't quite done the sculpt mould perhaps as well as I could have, and I took this opportunity to hide those too. With all the grey, dreary Devastation done, it's time to put in the nature, and this springs out of Ammaroth's footprints. So to help model it, I 3D printed his feet. I just cut them off in Blender and 3D printed them on my FDM printer really quickly. Now I did this on 2 days and I wasn't very happy at the end of the first day, and thankfully I got interrupted by a friend, which was brilliant because it gave me a chance to reflect. So don't feel that sometimes your first attempt is your only attempt. You can come back. And what I wish I had done at this stage was add in some green ground foam to add more density to the nature areas, because you could actually see the Devastation through when I put all of what I'm about to put on. It wasn't ideal, but I started off with 2mm spring grass from WWS just to put something into the footprints. I also hoovered after every stage because I don't want this grass and greenery to pollute the devastated dark areas. I also wanted some colour, so I got out these knock laser cut plants. They're absolutely beautiful, but they're a little tall, so I had to cover them in bushes and make them feel less obtrusive. But I wanted the idea that flowers are growing up and overwhelming all of that devastation. I also added some miniature, I think it's maple leaves, but I'm using them almost like an ivy or some kind of ground creeper. Some WWS grass clumps, but they've got a huge amount of glue at the bottom, so I cut them quite short and just cut off all the glue. And then also, finally, some hecky, just foliage that's on a polyfiber base. It's very fine leaf though. And the trouble is, the scale on this is tree size, but vegetation is for HO or 00 scale. And it's much too large, but I want the nature to look verdant, so I want to look like it's growing. So it's a bit of a compromise, and I've got it winding up the trees and spreading out as if that nature is coming out like a wake of a boat behind him. So we're back the next day to decide what to do. And overnight I put it on my Discord and had some comments that perhaps it needed some grass or something coming out where his front feet were. So I put down the base layer and it's Fine Turf by Woodland Scene, it's Green Blend, which is a great initial green. Oh, something's growing out of his feet. And then I put that around his back feet, and I started to build up the footprints behind as if it was growing more quickly. And finally, I just added ground foam everywhere, spreading out. So feeling my way along, I added more and more of the previous layers. And this is a WWS Pro applicator. It's a really, really small one. So we only put a small amount of grass in, but it's brilliant for getting under Ammaroth's feet and around the back and not knocking any of the trees or Ammaroth himself. More WWS grass clumps, more ground foam. I just built it up and up, layer by layer, until I felt I had a feeling of verdant nature. Now, the problem I did have was I had to get ground foam down round the bushes. So although I was putting glue down a lot, in the end I just had to sprinkle it on and tamp it in, and then come back and glue it again later, because I just couldn't get the glue past the bushes without globbing it all over the bush. So when it was all in place, I dripped on more isopropyl alcohol and put on more dilute matte Mod Podge. And like I said before, best to spray the whole area with some isopropyl alcohol to avoid getting water and glue marks on your char grout surface. And when it was dry, I was done. Ammaroth is so cool, isn't he? If you enjoyed it, don't forget to go and check out Mammoth Factory Games on Kickstarter. There'll be late pledges, etc. if you're watching this later. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, subscribe, hit the like button, bell button, you know, all that kind of malarkey. Consider supporting me with some cash if you want to. You really don't have to though. Otherwise, see you next time.